She handed over an ID card that looked like it belonged in a museum. The security guard laughed, even said, "Looks like this expired before I was even born." But when he waved it under the scanner, just to watch it fail, the screen lit up with a gold emblem they'd never seen before. An alarm started going off throughout the building. Nobody was laughing anymore, because that wasn't just any old ID card. It was something that wasn't supposed to exist. Want to know what happened when they realized who they'd just mocked? Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The morning air outside the VA medical campus still held that crisp bite of early autumn, though you could already feel the day's heat coiling up from the asphalt, like a promise of discomfort to come. Most of the parking lot sat empty except for a handful of sedans scattered across the painted lines and a lone maintenance truck backed into a yellow striped space near the loading dock. The automatic glass doors breathed open with a tired mechanical sigh as Avery Cross stepped through. 54 years old, civilian windbreakers zipped halfway up over a plain white t-shirt, sturdy black boots that had seen better years but still held their polish, faded jeans with wear patterns that spoke of work, not fashion, no makeup, no jewelry except for a thin gold watch that caught the fluorescent light as she moved. Her silver hair was braided tight and low down her back, not out of vanity, but the kind of discipline that becomes second nature after decades of practice. She walked with a subtle limp that didn't slow her down, just gave her stride a measured rhythm, like someone who'd learned to work around old injuries without letting them define her. Her right hand held a worn leather wallet. Her left clutched a canvas folder, marked only with faint smudged initials that might have once meant something to someone who knew how to read them. The main reception area felt larger than it needed to be. All polished floors and beige walls designed to move people efficiently through government processes. A tinny radio near the check-in desk played classic country that nobody was really listening to, the kind of background noise that made silence feel less institutional. Two young security personnel leaned against the scanner station like they'd been there since before dawn and had several more hours to kill. The one manning the ID scanner was Private Mendoza, maybe 22, with the soft edges of someone who'd never deployed beyond the wire. His partner, PFC, Kinley, had one boot kicked up against the counter while he nursed lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup that had seen better mornings. Neither looked old enough to remember when smartphones weren't standard issue, much less when military IDs looked different than they did today. "Morning, ma'am," Mendoza said without much enthusiasm, giving Avery a glance before his eyes dropped to the ID she slid across the laminated countertop. It was old, really old, a laminated common access card that looked like it had been issued sometime in the previous century, with corners worn soft and a surface that had been handled by too many fingers over too many years. The photograph showed a much younger Avery with regulation short hair, stone-cold eyes, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd never smiled for a camera in her life. The card had no visible expiration date, just a red authorization bar and a QR strip encoded with information that existed in databases most people didn't know existed. Mendoza raised an eyebrow and let out a low whistle. "Whoa, that's vintage." His partner leaned over for a closer look and actually laughed out loud. "What is this, like phase 1 clearance from the Stone Age?" Avery didn't respond, just stood there with that particular kind of stillness that suggested she'd waded through worse conversations than this one. "Seriously though," Kinley added, grinning like he'd discovered something amusing, "did you print this off Wikipedia? This thing belongs in the Smithsonian." Mendoza gave his own chuckle, the kind that said he was enjoying himself more than his job usually allowed. "All right, let's see if this bad boy even works anymore." He picked up the card with 2 fingers like it might be contagious and waved it under the scanner with exaggerated ceremony. A red light flashed once. Then again, the screen blinked. "Unrecognized format, please retry." "Uh-huh," Mendoza said, glancing over his shoulder at his partner with a satisfied smirk. "Called it. System doesn't even know what to do with this thing." He slid the card back toward Avery with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd proven his point. "Ma'am, unless that card's got some kind of magic powers, it's not getting you past this desk. You're gonna need something from this century." Kinley's grin widened as he took another sip of his coffee. "Maybe it's one of those ghost program cards. Operation Classified Grandma or something? Avery remained absolutely motionless. The kind of stillness that felt earned rather than passive, like someone who'd learned the value of patience in places where impatience could get you killed. Her eyes weren't on the two soldiers making jokes at her expense. They were fixed on the scanner screen, watching something the guards hadn't noticed yet. A small amber light above the terminal had started blinking. Mendoza tried again, this time swiping the card slower, amused by his own persistence. Maybe if I wave it around 3 times and chant, please work, it'll... Click. The scanner made a different sound. Not the electronic beep they were used to, but a hard mechanical snap followed by a soft digital hum that seemed to come from somewhere deeper in the system. The screen went black for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then, something new appeared. A gold circle materialized in the center of the dark screen, containing a downward-pointing black triangle that began to rotate slowly, hypnotically. Around its edge, encrypted symbols pulsed in a pattern that neither guard recognized. The triangle spun once, twice, picking up speed until it became a blur of motion that somehow remained perfectly clear. Then a line of red text appeared beneath the emblem in bold capital letters that seemed to burn themselves into the screen. Flag protocol, alpha, red zone authorized identity detected. The scanner beeped twice, sharp and urgent. Then the entire terminal locked with a finality that sounded like a vault door closing. Kinley stopped mid-sip, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Mendoza's fingers went rigid an inch from the keyboard, like he'd suddenly realized he might be touching something that could bite back. Avery looked up slowly, meeting their eyes with the same calm expression she'd worn since walking through the door. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the sudden silence. Looks like the card worked. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The only sound was the low, mechanical hum coming from the scanner and the distant whisper of air conditioning through overhead vents. The emblem on the screen continued its steady rotation, not animated like a computer graphic, but alive in a way that made both soldiers instinctively step back from the terminal. The triangle spun clockwise once more. Then the screen flashed red with new text. Security lock engaged. Restricted authorization detected. Notify command authority. Protocol Alpha E. Behind the desk, the terminal made a low, warbling tone that neither Mendoza nor Kinley had ever heard before. Down the hallway, a small amber light began blinking beside what looked like a fire suppression panel. Then another light joined it. Then another. Mendoza's hand hovered over the keyboard like he was afraid to touch it. That's not normal. No kidding, Kinley muttered, staring at the screen like it might suddenly explode and take half the building with it. From somewhere overhead, a speaker crackled to life with a voice neither of them recognized. Tense, sharp, all business. Checkpoint 1, this is Security Command. Lock that station down immediately. Step away from the terminal. That is not a standard clearance verification. Kinley looked at Mendoza with the expression of someone who just realized he might have accidentally triggered something far beyond his pay grade. Did we just break something important? Avery hadn't moved from her position in front of the counter. She stood exactly as she had before, perfectly still, perfectly calm, like she'd been through situations like this before and knew exactly how they played out. Like she'd spent time in rooms where chaos was just another part of the job. Wait, Kinley whispered, his eyes darting across the information displayed on the locked screen. This says Alpha 5. That can't be right. That's way above base level authorization. Mendoza's fingers trembled slightly as he backed away from the terminal. We messed up, man. We really, really messed up. Kinley set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady anymore. What does red zone authorized even mean? Avery spoke again, her tone unchanged, quiet, matter of fact, cutting through the tension in the air like it was nothing more than morning fog. It means I'm not here by accident. Down the hallway, doors began closing automatically with hydraulic hisses that echoed off the polished floors. A group of VA staff near the vending machines stopped their conversation mid-sentence as radios clipped to their belts came alive with low chatter and encrypted codes that sounded urgent, even when you couldn't understand them. Someone in a white lab coat looked up sharply from a clipboard and whispered to a colleague, "Did they just say Alpha 5? The air in the lobby had changed. What had been just another sleepy federal building processing routine morning business had snapped into something else entirely. Alert protocol, lockdown tight, with personnel moving with the kind of purpose that said they'd been trained for situations they'd hoped never to encounter. But the strangest thing wasn't the lockdown, or the flashing lights, or the sudden radio chatter. It was that nobody seemed to know why it was happening. The guard, monitoring security feeds from behind reinforced glass, looked rattled as he picked up a red phone with hands that shook slightly. He keyed into what sounded like a secure channel and spoke in the kind of clipped, urgent tone reserved for emergencies. "Command, I need senior authority on the line right now. We just had an alpha level authorization activate. It's not a drill, not legacy. It's live." Inside the reception area, Kinley looked like he was about to be sick. His face had gone pale, and he kept glancing between the locked terminal and Avery, like he couldn't decide which one was more dangerous. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, his voice smaller than it had been 5 minutes earlier, "I think there might have been some kind of system error. Maybe a glitch or something." "No," Avery said calmly, never raising her voice above conversational level. "There wasn't." The wall monitor that had been cycling through facility maps and general announcements blinked once and went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a slightly different shade that made the morning feel later than it was. Everyone around her was either frozen in place or moving with sudden urgency. Nobody was making jokes anymore about vintage cards or ghost programs, and nobody knew who had just walked through their front door. From behind a side door marked authorized personnel only, a stocky man in a security forces vest emerged at something between a walk and a run. Sergeant First Class Delaney was VA liaison for facility security, with the look of someone who'd been active duty once, but now trusted procedures and paperwork more than instinct or improvisation. He took one look at the frozen terminal, the rotating emblem still glowing on the screen, and his expression went from routine irritation to something much more serious. "All right," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "What the hell happened here?" Mendoza straightened, like someone had run electricity through his spine. "Sir, she handed us this old card, and we thought it was fake, so we scanned it just to show her it wouldn't work, but then it triggered something we've never seen before." Kinley jumped in, words tumbling over each other. "The system locked up and started displaying this Alpha 5 protocol thing, and now there are alarms going off and..." Delaney held up one hand, cutting them both off mid-sentence. He looked at Avery, who was still standing quietly in front of the terminal, like none of this surprised her in the slightest. "Ma'am," he said slowly, choosing his words with the care of someone who'd suddenly realized he might be out of his depth, "I'm going to need you to remain here while we verify your credentials through proper channels." Avery met his eyes with that same steady calm. "I've been verified." Delaney glanced at the screen again, where the emblem continued its hypnotic rotation above text that he was beginning to suspect meant more than he understood. "Right. Well, I still need to run this through the chain of command." "Looks like it already went through the chain," Avery said quietly. "You're just catching up." The comment landed with the kind of weight that made Delaney swallow hard and reconsider everything he thought he knew about the morning's routine. Behind him, Kinley leaned toward Mendoza and whispered urgently, "You think she's CIA or something? Like really CIA?" Mendoza's mouth felt dry as dust. "I think we just tried to bounce someone who doesn't bounce." The intercom crackled again with another voice, different from before, calmer, but with an undercurrent of urgency that suggested this was escalating beyond normal protocols. "Alpha 5 clearance confirmed active. Dispatching command-level personnel from administrative annex, subject to be held with full courtesy protocols. Do not detain. Repeat, do not detain." Delaney went pale. "Courtesy protocols?" Kinley frowned like he was trying to translate a foreign language. What does that even mean? It means, Delaney said, tugging at his collar in a gesture that spoke of sudden nervousness, whoever she is, she outranks every person in this building, and we just spent the last 10 minutes treating her like a joke. 2 military police officers appeared in the doorway. A man and a woman, both in crisp uniforms with gear that looked light but functional. Their eyes swept the room professionally until they found Avery, and when they saw the emblem still rotating on the locked screen, their postures shifted in a way that suggested recognition. The male MP stepped forward with the kind of respectful bearing usually reserved for senior officers. "Ma'am, we're here to escort you to interim command processing for verification and liaison protocol." He wasn't asking, but he wasn't ordering either. It was the military's version of "if you would be so kind," delivered with the understanding that refusal wasn't really an option, but coercion wasn't appropriate either. Avery gave the faintest nod and moved toward them without hesitation. Kinley stared like she'd just levitated. The MPs didn't handcuff her, didn't touch her arm, didn't position themselves like guards handling a potential threat. They simply walked on either side of her. Not ahead, not behind, as she moved toward the corridor that led to the administrative wing. As they passed, Mendoza stepped back, like proximity alone might result in some kind of disciplinary action. Delaney exhaled slowly, watching the small procession disappear around the corner. "Get me her file," he muttered to nobody in particular. Kinley shook his head slowly. "You think she's one of those off-book types? Like really off-book?" The guard behind the reinforced glass who'd made the secure call turned around and spoke quietly, his voice carrying a certainty that cut through the speculation. "She's above the book." Avery didn't look back once as they led her away. She didn't need to. The command wing on the second floor was usually reserved for administrative overflow, late personnel filings, interagency coordination meetings, the kind of bureaucratic business that kept government facilities running but rarely made headlines. But this morning, it was buzzing with an activity that felt different from the usual routine. Avery sat alone in a glass-walled conference room with her hands resting calmly on the polished table. Her expression remained neutral, not bored, not nervous, just present in the way of someone who'd learned to wait without wasting energy on impatience. The door remained open, yet nobody had stepped inside. The emblem was still cycling slowly on a desktop display panel, and nobody seemed to know how to turn it off. Maybe nobody wanted to try. Outside in the hallway, 4 staff members clustered around a printer, pretending to review documents while stealing glances through the glass wall. A young officer appeared at the corner, took one look into the conference room, and quickly retreated, whispering urgently to someone just out of sight. The stairwell door banged open with authority. Colonel Tessa McBride didn't walk into the command wing. She took control of it. There was a difference in the way she moved, like someone accustomed to stepping into chaotic situations and making them organize themselves through sheer force of presence. Steel gray hair cropped regulation short, flight jacket over pressed fatigues, silver oak leaves catching the overhead fluorescence just enough to remind everyone in sight exactly who was in charge. She moved without an aide, without a clipboard, without the usual entourage that followed senior officers. Just authority in motion. "Who triggered Flag Protocol Alpha 5? She asked in a voice loud enough to carry down the hall. "And why wasn't I notified the instant it happened?" Nobody answered immediately. The staff members around the printer suddenly found their documents fascinating. The young officer who'd been peeking around corners made himself invisible. A civilian administrator, near the elevator, tried to stammer something about technical difficulties and outdated access credentials, but McBride cut her off with a gesture that brooked no argument. She turned into the conference room and faced Avery directly. "Ms. Cross," Avery inclined her head slightly. "Colonel, you always did know how to make an entrance. I prefer to think of it as knowing how to get people's attention when necessary." McBride allowed the faintest hint of a smile before turning to address the cluster of confused personnel who'd gathered in the hallway to witness whatever was about to happen. "Let me clear something up," she said, her voice carrying the kind of weight that made everyone within the earshot stand a little straighter. "What you're looking at is not a system malfunction. It's not a security breach, a spoofed credential, or an outdated access card that somebody forgot to deactivate. She reached into the breast pocket of her flight jacket and pulled out a black folder with red classification borders, the kind that didn't belong in unsecured hands and rarely saw daylight outside of specific circumstances. This, she said, holding up a single document from inside the folder, is an operations archive from a program that none of you have ever heard of, because none of you were ever cleared to know it existed. She turned the page so they could see it. Most of the text was redacted with black bars, but at the top was a clear image of the same gold and black triangle emblem that was still rotating on the conference room display. Echo 0, she read from handwritten text in the margin. Authorization level classified above your clearance. 6 individuals in the entire United States military were ever issued this designation. 4 are dead, 1 is missing and presumed dead. The 6th is sitting in that chair. She looked directly at Mendoza and Kinley, who had somehow found their way upstairs, and were now standing near the back of the group, looking like they wanted to disappear into the floor. And you called her a joke. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to absorb sound from the surrounding building. Effective immediately, McBride continued without raising her voice. Those 2 individuals are reassigned to facilities maintenance for remedial training in respect and protocol. Report to the custodial supervisor at 0600 tomorrow for duty assignments. She folded the document back into its folder and secured it in her jacket. Everyone else can return to their normal duties with the understanding that what happened here this morning is classified at levels you don't need to understand. She gestured toward Avery. Walk with me. Avery stood with the same calm precision she'd shown throughout the morning and followed the colonel out of the conference room. The hallway parted in front of them like water around a ship's bow. Nobody spoke until they were well out of earshot. The corridor felt different now, quieter, like the aftermath of a storm that had passed without breaking anything, but had left everyone aware of how quickly the weather could change. Colonel McBride set a measured pace, her boots clicking softly against the polished floor. Avery matched her stride easily, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes taking in the familiar institutional hallway with the kind of attention that suggested she'd walked through similar buildings before. We kept the access active, McBride said, after they'd put some distance between themselves and the cluster of confused personnel. Wasn't sure if you'd ever need it again. Didn't think I would, Avery replied, but you knew it was there. I knew someone would be watching the system. I knew if I ever used it, it would get attention from the right people. They passed a series of framed photographs, official portraits of facility commanders, group shots of administrative staff, the kind of institutional decoration that filled government buildings everywhere. Most people walked past them without looking. McBride slowed near a particular frame. You remember Hammond? She asked, indicating a formal portrait of a man in dress uniform with kind eyes and silver hair. Good officer, Avery said, listened more than he talked. He's the one who argued against deleting your access, said some clearances should never expire, no matter what the bureaucrats wanted. They continued walking, past a glass memorial case filled with military memorabilia and faded photographs, names etched in metal, dates that marked deployments and losses. The quiet accounting of service that most visitors never stopped to read. You carrying much weight these days? McBride asked quietly. Avery took a moment to consider the question. Weight doesn't go anywhere. You just get stronger at carrying it. That's what I figured you'd say. They reached a junction where the hallway branched toward different wings of the building. McBride stopped at a window that looked out over the parking lot, where the morning sun was now high enough to make the asphalt shimmer with heat. Those boys back there, she said, they're not bad soldiers, just young. Haven't learned yet that respect isn't something you withhold until someone proves they deserve it. They'll learn, Avery said, or they won't last. You think about teaching? I think about a lot of things. Most of them I decide against. McBride smiled slightly. Fair enough. But if you ever change your mind about staying quiet, there are people who could benefit from hearing your voice. Avery looked out the window at her truck, sitting alone in the visitor parking area. I've said what needed saying. Today was just a reminder that some conversations aren't finished. No, McBride agreed. They're not. They walked the remaining distance to the side exit in comfortable silence. No ceremony, no formal farewell, just two professionals who understood that some things didn't require words. McBride held the door open. Take care of yourself, Avery. Always do. And if you ever need anything, I know where to find you. Avery stepped out into the bright morning air. The heat was building now, promising another scorching afternoon, but the early clarity was still there, that particular quality of light that made everything seem sharper, more defined. Her truck started on the first turn of the key, engine settling into its familiar rumble. She adjusted the rearview mirror out of habit and caught a glimpse of the building behind her, where people were probably still trying to understand what had just happened. She didn't need to understand it. She'd lived it. The drive through the facility grounds was quiet. She passed the loading dock where maintenance crews were beginning their daily routines, past administrative buildings where the normal business of government was resuming after a brief interruption. Near the main entrance, she spotted two familiar figures in maintenance coveralls, each carrying cleaning equipment, like they were getting acquainted with tools they'd never expected to use. Mendoza and Kinley, beginning their education in consequences. Kinley looked up as her truck approached. For a moment, their eyes met through the windshield. His expression sheepish, almost apologetic. He raised his hand in a small wave that seemed more like an acknowledgement than a greeting. Avery didn't slow down, but she nodded once, just slightly. Enough. Then she was past the gate and onto the access road that led back to the highway. Back to whatever life looked like when you weren't reminding people that respect is something you give until someone proves they don't deserve it. Behind her, the VA facility settled back into its routine. But something had shifted there, something that would ripple outward in small ways, in how people looked at identification they didn't recognize, in how they spoke to visitors who didn't fit their expectations, in the understanding that assumptions could be dangerous when you didn't know who you were talking to. From a third-floor window, Colonel McBride watched the truck disappear into traffic. A young staffer approached with a tablet full of incident reports and requests for clarification. Colonel, what should I put in the official record about this morning's events? McBride continued, watching the road for a moment before answering. Put down that we had a security system verification that resolved without incident. All relevant personnel have been appropriately briefed. And the individual who triggered the alert? What individual? The staffer looked confused. The woman with the Alpha 5 clearance? McBride turned away from the window. I don't know what you're talking about. Alpha 5 clearances don't exist. She walked away, leaving the staffer with a tablet full of reports about something that officially never happened. And somewhere on the highway heading home, Avery Cross drove with the windows down and the radio playing softly, carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd reminded the world that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you possess until you choose to give it away. Ever seen someone get underestimated until a single moment changed everything? What would you have done if you'd scanned an ID like that? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story reminded you that respect should be given freely until someone proves they don't deserve it, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about quiet courage and earned dignity. And if you know a veteran whose service deserves recognition, share this video with them, because the most powerful warriors are often the ones you'd never suspect. Other stories about hidden heroes are waiting on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on Dignity Defended.